We have seen how the Leica camera increased the mobility of the photojournalists at that time. We have with us Mr. Gopinath Srikandan, who is a self-taught photographer and has a small collection of different types of cameras. Let's find out from him about the cameras of that time and how they were used. Gopinath, tell us that why was it that the Leica and other 35mm cameras became the preferred choice of the photojournalists?
I think the main reason why Leica and other 35mm cameras became the sought after camera for photojournalists is primarily its size, its compactness. See, earlier, just before the 35mm film format came, films were of larger size. Either at the minimum, you would say just above the 35mm you have the medium format, and then you have the large format. So in both these formats, medium and large formats, films come in rolls, and it has a coating of paper. Loading them and unloading them was clumsy, and with all these large formats and medium format films, the number of exposures that you could make was also limited. So on an average, on a medium format camera, you could make about, say, 12 exposures. With the 35mm format, what happened was, first of all, the film came enclosed in a metal canister, and it was small enough so that photojournalists could carry more film for their assignments, especially if they are away from their offices. And the camera, given its size, also was easy to carry, so they could even carry two cameras. Earlier, with the medium format and the large format cameras, it was very difficult to carry multiple cameras. Well, those days, photojournalists and others, they did carry such heavy loads. Sometimes they had assistants to carry all these cameras. But then with the 35mm format, the lightness, the compactness, and the number of films that they could carry were all at an advantage for them to move around. It basically opened up it opened up their field. They could travel far and away to go and do their assignments. So that, in my view, is the primary reason why the 35mm became the most preferred cameras for the photojournalist, and also in the coming years, it became a sought after camera for consumers as well, or enthusiasts, everybody.
So Gopinath, which were the other types of cameras that were still in use at the same time that the Leica became popular?
There was large format cameras. One could also call a large format camera as a field camera or a view camera, like the one you see right in front of me. Then there was medium format cameras. Then there were 35mm, and then came 110mm, which was half the size of, or even less than half the size of a 35mm film format. So when we look at the large format cameras, on an average, the negative size would measure something like 6 inches by 4 inches, or sometimes 4 inches by 5 inches. There are also negatives that measured 6 inches by 9 inches. And these are sheet negatives. They came as large sheets wrapped in a light, tight envelope. So to load them, you need to find some sort of a dark room. Well, if you are working in the field, such a dark room is very difficult. So there are portable dark rooms, which are basically sacks which are light, tight. So that was the clumsiness in some sense of the large format cameras, but it did also have its advantages, like because the negative size was large, you could make larger enlargements. Larger print size were possible. And then you have the medium format cameras, where the size of the negative measured roughly by 6 centimeters by 6 centimeters, or depending on, there are several variations within the medium format cameras. So the conventional medium format camera shot a 6 centimeter by 6 centimeter negative. There are variations which shot 6 centimeters by 4.5 centimeters, and so on. So with the medium format cameras, the negatives are relatively smaller than the large format camera. The average negative size of a medium format camera is like 6 centimeters by 6 centimeters. But then there are variations. Some cameras, depending on their design, would shoot on a 6 by 6 negative, it will only shoot 6 by 4.5 centimeters. So as you can see, the quest for compactness has already started much before the 35mm came in. So the types of cameras, if you look at it with this medium format cameras, you have the camera like the one here, where you loaded a roll film and you shot 12 frames. But then here, if you see, there is a viewfinder that is separate, and then you had a lens that would shoot separately. So there you kind of saw what you saw was not exactly what the lens was seeing. Okay, so that was the case with all rangefinders. There is some sort of an error or some sort of a slight difference between what the viewfinder showed you and what you saw through the viewfinder and what actually the lens recorded. But then that was negligible, so you could always get a reasonably good framed picture. So then came the TLRs. TLRs are twin lens reflex cameras. So where you had two lenses, as the name suggests. So one lens was used to view, or rather used to frame your photograph, and the other one recorded. And there was a lot of similarities between the focal length of these two lenses, so that you pretty much saw what you are shooting. Although you are not seeing through the lens that actually records the shot, but then a parallel lens that helps you to frame pretty much exactly what the other lens is looking at it. With the rangefinder and this TLRs, you still had the same error, especially when you came to when you're making photographs at close quarters. So these were those issues around that time. Then came the 35mm camera, like the legendary Leica came in. So with the legendary Leica also, it was initially a rangefinder. So again, that same error, what we in photographic terms, what we call it is a parallax error. So what the viewfinder saw and what the lens saw was slightly different. Then came the SLRs. I think we are all very familiar with SLRs. Nowadays, we are familiar with DSLR. SLR means like single lens reflex cameras, and DSLR is just a digital added to it. So instead of a film, there is a digital sensor. So in SLR, what you primarily see is what you get, because the image, whatever was you're photographing, it's entered through the lens, and there was a mirror which reflected it and brought it to your viewfinder. So you exactly saw what you are going to shoot. Right at the moment of shooting, the mirror flipped and then the image was recorded. So these were largely the kind of cameras that were in use. But then there was also another type of camera which has kind of gone out of fashion these days, is the compact cameras. So compact cameras are essentially 35mm cameras. They use the same 35mm film, but then they were much more compact. You could put it in your coat pocket and walk around. It was hugely popular among consumers up until the early 2000s, but now with the digital technology, well, technically you can call them compact, but then all cameras are becoming as compact as possible. So these are largely the types of cameras that was then when the Leica came in and what we have today.
Gopinath, I'm sure the students are going to be very curious to know, in the sense of history of photography and people taking photographs and documenting their lives, that at that time when these cameras came around, who were using these cameras? Who were the people who were taking the photographs?
Interestingly enough, as photography was becoming popular, as the photography technology itself was pretty new in Europe, it very soon came to India. I think if I'm correct, it didn't take even it did not even take about 2 decades before photography arrived in India. You could say one reason was because India was under the colonial rule of the British Empire. So the East India Company, the British colonial rulers, they had a reason to document India, and so they brought in the cameras. But then, as any technology, when it arrives at a place, it also kind of gets assimilated, gets transferred to the local people. So the early adapters of, or rather early users of photography in India, if you see, they were largely kings or princes or industrialists, or in general you would say people who had the money. But then slowly it also kind of this whole the novelty of photography brought people towards it, and slowly studios began to be set up across the country. So initially studios were all set up by many British citizens here, but then there are also a lot of Indians who quickly adapted to those learned the technology and adapted. They even made their own cameras and quickly started using them. So at some sense, although it was only limited to the people who had the money and then the professionals, I would call the studio professionals. So it was quite interesting to see that photography came pretty early on into India.
Thank you. So as we've seen that photography started and slowly it grew, and initially it was used by a limited number of people. However, with the passage of time, photography became very popular and the cameras became more and more affordable, and now today each one of you probably is taking a photograph through your mobile camera.
Another interesting point about photography in India is, as far as I can remember, when the princes and the kings were practicing photography in those early days of the technology, they will have to kind of take a particular paper, sensitize that with appropriate chemicals, load it on back of a large wooden view camera, which in front of it there was one lens which they opened for a certain number of seconds and then they closed, and the image was etched on this chemical coated paper. Interestingly, if you get a chance to go to Delhi's Chandni Chowk, I'm not sure if it still exists, but until about 2005 or 2010 even, there were studio photographers on the roadside just opposite Red Fort who had these ancient box cameras, large wooden box cameras, pretty much around the time when photography came into India, the similar cameras, and they are making portraits of tourists and whoever wished to take their pictures taken. So that is pretty much, that is in some sense they've kind of you could say they hung on with the tradition, or it could be just a novel thing. But the fact is, one of the oldest forms of photography that came into India was still being practiced. So if you ever get a chance to go there, go and check out, or perhaps maybe in your own locality there are some more old photographers who are still doing it. I am aware that a few enthusiasts these days are doing it. They coat their own papers, they buy the chemicals and do it. Hobbyists have taken it, enthusiasts have taken it, but then there are still some old photographers in some corners of India. They're still doing it. That's in some sense is the beauty of India also. On the other hand, likewise, like in India, as commoners took over, assimilated the technology, elsewhere in the world also photography was becoming popular. It moved away from the hands of, moved beyond rather, from the professionals to the consumers. So everyone was using camera to record precious moments about their families, about their friends, about something they wanted to show. It could be a landscape or it could be their favorite pet. So photography was becoming an everyday part of their everyday life soon.
In the history of photography, we've seen that something which was used by only a few became something to be used by the commoners, by all of us. And more people started using cameras to document things that were happening in their lives, where they were, what they were witnessing, what they were seeing. And the camera became a device or a tool to get a moment and preserve it and keep it for eternity. So we have seen how photography became both common and popular and was widely used by many. Today, we are not only using photography, we are also sharing photography instantly, as we know. through various forms, especially social media. We hope that you have enjoyed this module on the introduction and development of photography and an introduction to the cameras. We're going to have more and go deeply into getting to know more about the kinds of cameras and how they were used.